Hi everybody, I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is Jomayra Herrera, partner at Reach Capital. Jomayra, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Before we get started, I do want to set the scene here a little bit. We're backstage at the Under 30 Summit here in Cleveland. And before we dive into the conversation, can you tell us a little bit about Reach Capital?
Absolutely. So I'm a partner at Reach Capital. We're an early stage venture fund investing in startups, usually leading or co-leading their seed or Series A rounds. And all those companies are focused on education or the future of work. So really focusing on empowering students or workers.
So let's first talk about that education component. You were actually a under 30 lister in the education category, so this has obviously resonated with you. It's been an issue near and dear to your heart. Can you explain why?
So for me, it's really about my own lived experience. So I grew up fairly low income. I mostly went to under-resourced public schools growing up, and I saw the inequities that exist within schools. And I feel really lucky that I had a few special teachers that really invested in me. And that's the reason I was able, in my opinion, to get out of the communities that I was in, be able to ultimately go to a good school and get into a good career. But I don't think that luck should be involved. I don't think that it should be an exception to the rule. And so I've dedicated most of my career to date focused on how do you increase equity within schools, and in my case, leveraging venture capital in order to help accelerate that.
What would be your one piece of advice then for maybe a student who finds themselves in an underfunded school and wants a bright future ahead, but they feel a few steps behind compared to other kids with perhaps more privilege?
So I would say two things. One is, while you may feel a few steps behind because of the fewer resources than you might have than others, don't forget the things that you do have as a result of having to go through these experiences, which is you have stronger resilience, you have street smarts, you have the ability to navigate ambiguity oftentimes in ways that folks that grew up with more privilege don't have. And so there is a strength associated sometimes with the experiences that we've had. The other piece, which is a bit more tactical, is look for the mentors, look for the advisors, the role models, the teachers that will pour into you, that will invest in you, or the coaches or some other adult in your school setting that will help you navigate getting to and through school and ultimately to what your end destination you want it to be.
Can you talk about a time where you leaned on that resilience, you leaned on those street smarts to get where you are today?
Honestly, countless times, but the time that is popping up for me, just given that we were talking about school experiences, is probably navigating the college experience. So I'm the first in my family to go to college, and I didn't necessarily have parents that I could ask about which school should I apply to, how do I apply to these schools, how do I navigate this. I went to a public high school that had 4,200 students and 4 counselors, and so the idea of relying on a counselor also was out of the question.
They're already overwhelmed, clearly.
Totally, yeah. Exactly. And so then it's often relying on this sense of other communities. So I remember I relied heavily on my best friend. Me and her were just going at it. We're like, we're going to navigate this together. And then as we got both acceptances and rejections, we took them with stride and we kept moving forward. And even though it was really hard to navigate that experience and get the information that we needed, there is that degree of resilience that comes in of you just push through and you figure out how to do it. And I think going back to what I was saying earlier, I don't think that should be the case. There shouldn't be kids that are in schools with 4 counselors and 4,200 students and those counselors are overwhelmed. But I will say that I probably came out stronger out of that experience, and I think it's a time where I relied on that resilience.
I do want to pivot now and talk to another component of Reach, and that is the future of work. And we have seen a paradigm shift in the past few years. When it comes to work, ever since the start of the pandemic, the work has just drastically changed. So what do you think the future of work is?
Oh, that is a loaded question. And it's so funny because we're actually working on a report right now called Reimagine Work at Reach to try to answer some of this question. And the truth is, the way that we're thinking about it is like the what is work has changed, where you work has changed, when you work has changed. There's so many things that have changed as a result of the global pandemic, but also were trends even happening before the pandemic. And I think the larger overarching belief that we have about the future of work, or what we hope the future of work would look like, is that workers are in a place where they are empowered to have the flexibility that works for them, that serves them. They have the meaningful work that brings them joy, that feels connected to their purpose. And they are able to be in environments where they're able to truly thrive. They have a sense of belongingness. There's a degree of diversity in those environments. And so the future of work, what we hope, is one where it doesn't feel like you are exhausted by the idea of going into work, but it's one that actually is fulfilling, and that ultimately your employer is investing in you and your growth and you as a person.
Do you think the future of work looks bright? Because we've seen this shift of where employees now have a lot of power before, it seems, that they didn't have in the past.
So I do think that some power has certainly shifted back to employees, and I think that's especially true for the frontline workforce. So if you look right now at the broader labor market, it's a bit looser at the knowledge worker level, because you have a lot of tech companies that overhire during a boom period of the market. But on the other hand, you have frontline workers, blue collar workers, where there is a massive shortage. And so where you have a supply and demand imbalance, the power shifts to the worker, right? Because the employer will do anything to be able to get that worker. And so as a result, we've seen things like employers actually investing in workers' education, giving them access to free college education as a benefit, giving them access to flexibility as a benefit. We have a company called WorkWell that helps enable that flexibility for that hourly workforce. And so I do think that we're starting to see a shift, and it's largely because of the way right now that we see the market having a supply and demand imbalance.
I do now want to shift to you a little bit. You were an under 30 lister back in 2018, so you reached success at a young age. So
I don't know if I would call that success, but sure.
So I would call it success. So when you get to that level of success and you feel the feeling of now what, how did you navigate that?
So funny, because I remember when I got on the list, I walked into the office and there was a big, everyone was sitting around my desk so excited to celebrate me, and I remember just running into a conference room and closing the door, and I was like, this is too much attention. And then I walked out, I let them celebrate me, and then I was like, it's time to get back to work. Because the truth is, the success that I'm excited about is actually being able to push the needle and drive the needle on the issues I care about. And so if something like getting on a list like Forbes Under 30 helps to enable that by giving me a platform or giving me a voice, then I'm really excited about that opportunity. And so that's how I kind of viewed getting on the list was, it's given me a bit of a light and giving me a platform that I probably didn't have beforehand. And so that's the way that I've kind of leveraged it.
Clearly, you're very goal-oriented. If one of the first things you thought of is, now I need to get back to work, let's get back to work. But I want to read you a quote and ask your take on it. Okay. FM Alexander said this: people do not decide their futures, they decide their habits, and their habits decide their futures. So what's one habit that you do every day that decides your present and decides your future?
So I was once told by a former manager of mine that you can never show enough gratitude. And that has been one of the most important pieces of advice I've received. And so before bed every night, I always think about 3 pieces of gratitude, three things that I am grateful for of that day. And I think that habit serves me because it forces me to be present. It forces me to live in the day, and there's something about the feeling of gratitude where you ground yourself in the things that really matter, and you kind of let go of all the rest of the noise.
Absolutely. And when you were on the list, it was mostly millennials. We're seeing a shift now, and it's millennials and Gen Z. So what's one characteristic or piece of advice you're taking from Gen Z, and what's one piece of advice you would impart on them?
So the piece of advice that I take is, I think Gen Z is just so themselves. They're so unapologetically themselves.
So authentic.
And so authentic. And I think that that's something to take, and that's something for any generation to take, right? Is to be able to lean into your full self. I think one piece of advice I would impart is and this is going to sound very elder millennial, crusty millennial, whatever you want to call it.
I am a fellow crusty millennial, so I understand.
And so the one piece of advice I would impart is there's a lot more power in action than words. And so oftentimes when we want to complain about something or fight against something, yes, like there is an importance to words, and there is an importance to maybe to really kind of almost theorizing things, but it's important to remember about action and the practical. How do we actually push change in those issues that we care so deeply about and we talk so deeply about? And so I think when I think about Gen Z, the thing I'm most, like when I look at all that they've done, one of the movements that I'm so proud of that generation was March for Our Lives and the gun movement. I think like that's where they took real pain and suffering and actually translated it into action. Not to get political, but I don't think, saving kids from guns should be political, but I guess it is.
You were just on stage at the Under 30 Summit, and you were one of the judges for the pitch competition. So you saw some pitches from young entrepreneurs. I want your take. What is giving you hope about this next generation coming into the business world?
I think, going back to what I said, they're so unapologetically themselves. And the truth is, when you think about the best founders that you invest in, they have a lived experience that gives them an earned secret about the market that they're solving. And so when you have founders that are coming up from this generation that understand themselves, that explore themselves, that again are unapologetically themselves, they're going to bring that into their work, and that's going to translate into hopefully building very large generational businesses.
Jomayra Herrera, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.